polio. Today, on the 39th day of my action, I will conclude talking about the evolution of the methods used to control population growth by killing people or forcing them to migrate. Over the past 6 days, I covered infanticide, cannibalism, war, human ritual sacrifice, slavery, genocide, forced migration, social exclusion, death by overwork, self-immolation, witch burning, biological warfare, suicide and mass suicide, heresy and apostasy, massacres, and capital punishment. Today, I will cover the last 3 methods of killing people en masse: nuclear war, chemical poisoning, and biological depopulation. They are also the most recent. Let me start with nuclear war and radiation. Since the development of nuclear weapons in 1945, only one nation was sufficiently insane and cruel to use them: the United States. The 2 nuclear bombs dropped by the Americans on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 took nearly 250,000 Japanese lives, and nearly all of them civilians. In addition, since 1945, at least 8 nations have detonated over 2,000 nuclear bombs at dozens of test sites, contaminating the air, water, and soil, and killing countless people with radiation. It is estimated that approximately 2.4 million people have died from cancers caused by atmospheric nuclear weapons testing conducted between 1945 and 1980. This estimate comes from the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. The effects from fallout from nuclear tests, particularly atmospheric tests, continue to affect populations. The explosions released ionizing radiation which caused cancer and genetic damage, contaminating the environment and having long-term health consequences. Thousands more have died as a result of accidents at nuclear power plants and institutes and labs that work with nuclear materials. Circa 50 such accidents have occurred so far. Furthermore, 2,600 square kilometers of land have been rendered uninhabitable in the exclusion zone around Chernobyl alone. 371 square kilometers are still uninhabitable around Fukushima. The Bikini, Eniwetok, Utirik, and Rongelap atolls in the Marshall Islands have been rendered uninhabitable by America's nuclear testing, whereas the French nuclear testing program rendered several islands uninhabitable in French Polynesia, namely Mururoa, Fangataufa, Turea, Mangareva, and others in the Gambier and Windward group affected by radiation fallout. Due to the insatiable need for energy posed by AI and the planned proliferation of nuclear power plants to satisfy that need, we can expect many more such accidents to take place. Wi-Fi radiation, especially from cell phone towers, as well as excessive use of X-rays in medicine and dentistry, are the modern versions of death by radiation. To kill as many people as possible with cancer, governments and corporations are violating all safety laws and installing long-range Wi-Fi antennas on top of apartment buildings, schools, churches, and state institutions in densely populated areas to sicken as many people as possible with electromagnetic radiation. As a result, cancer has exploded. In the past 25 years alone, since Wi-Fi radiation exposure has increased, the incidence of cancer has more than doubled. As a result, nearly 10 million people die of cancer worldwide annually. That's 1 in 6 deaths. And the system intends to increase the number of cancer victims to 20 million a year by 2050. The second method of killing people today is covert poisoning. Since 1945, population control has been pursued by adulterating the basic elements of life with chemical poisons to subvert fertility and lower births, and by damaging the immune system with biological toxins in order to increase deaths. In addition, the family structure is being undermined through psychosocial and economic means to delay the formation of families and keep them small. This is the strategy used to defuse the overpopulation bomb and stabilize populations across the world. To avoid repeating the massacres of the two world wars and the frightening prospect of nuclear annihilation, world leaders agreed at the end of World War II to henceforth uphold peace among nations through mutual cooperation and proactive measures. Recent history had taught them the hard lesson that war is caused by lack of natural resources when nations outgrow them in their quest for progress and prosperity, and that war can therefore be avoided if nations learn to live within their means by properly managing their natural resources. It was also understood that the only way to avoid outgrowing natural resources is by limiting population growth, this being the only alternative to war. The rationale for controlling population growth by subverting fertility and immunity was therefore supplied by the real fear of nuclear conflict and the need to avoid it by living within one's national needs. Safeguarding natural resources became the primary national security prerogative of every industrialized country on Earth, and safeguarding peace among nations became the primary imperative of the international community, which was empowered to combat population growth across the world before it leads to wars of necessity. The United Nations was formed to fulfill the task of safeguarding international peace by controlling population growth within nations and facilitating access to raw materials for all nations. The New World Order revolves around the objective of maintaining international peace by controlling population growth and of fostering prosperity by controlling national resources, thus depopulation and globalization. Compared to the wanton destruction of war, proactively combating human fertility by mutual agreement, or, should that fail, by mutual coercion, also has the distinct advantage of sparing the physical infrastructure and ensuring uninterrupted economic progress. Since 1945, covert chemical and biological sterilization agents are responsible for lower birth rates and stable populations, and not prosperity and education as it is being asserted in order to deceive the public. This unpleasant reality is kept secret by the silence of those who are complicit in crimes against humanity and genocide. Our governments, the UN system, the military-industrial complex, and organized religions. And so we march ahead towards our self-destruction because the damage done by covert poisoning with endocrine disruptors inserted in the basic elements of life, food, water, drinks, body care products, and consumer products, has not only destroyed human fertility and health, but has also downgraded the genetic and intellectual endowment of humanity. The incidence and severity of non-communicable diseases has exploded as a result of covert chemical poisoning over multiple generations, since the damage done is cumulative and therefore worse from generation to generation. If continued, the vast majority of mankind will be shut out of procreation and condemned to lives of chronic illness and to enfeebled minds. Already, nearly a quarter of the populace of developed nations is infertile, and according to the latest statistics, nearly half remain childless. Already, average intelligence has decreased by at least 10 IQ points since 1945, and already 70% of the population of the developed world suffers from chronic illnesses caused by constant poisoning with endocrine disruptors. The institutional machinery of genocide was set in motion nearly 7 decades ago and has gathered such momentum that even those at the helm of the international community are powerless to stop it. Thousands of NGOs are now involved in the global depopulation policy, 7,000 at the last count, each carrying out a small part of this global genocide and doing so in the name of aid and humanitarian work. To date, circa 250 depopulation poisons are added to the food and beverages of Europe, either directly in the form of food additives or indirectly through the pesticides and herbicides used in agriculture, or through the packaged materials that foods are wrapped or bottled in and whose constituent chemicals leach and contaminate the contents. This is all by design. How did this come to be? By barring doctors from interfering with life once the moment of conception has taken place, religious authorities have tied the hands of medicine and have forced doctors to concentrate their efforts on preventing the moment of conception from taking place. Which is why Westerners, and in the meantime much of the world, are being poisoned since 1945 with endocrine disruptors that are inserted in water, food, beverages, and dental as well as cosmetic products so as to turn the basic elements of life into weapons of mass sterility, while immunodepressants delivered through vaccines, drugs, and GMOs increase morbidity and mortality, and in this fashion bring the number of births and the number of deaths in equilibrium, which results in stable populations. By its methodology, medicine has placed the burden of population control on the unborn, to the disapproval of the church, which has placed the burden on the adult population, partly due to the lack of contraceptive methods, but mostly due to ethical considerations that must rightly apportion the responsibility for desirable social outcomes on adults by calling upon them to control their reproductive urges and not on the unborn by preventing them from being born. But the church does not allow people to use contraceptives, thus creating a need for covert methods of population control and therefore for its continuous existence and power. Now, this arrangement serves no one except the interests of doctors and priests. While secular and religious authorities fight about control of the depopulation effort and about methods and justifications behind closed doors, we, the people, continue to be treated as nothing more than cattle, at best pets, and at worst pests, with dire consequences on our genetic and intellectual endowment, and with even greater consequences on our rights and liberties and the viability and legitimacy of the social contract. No paragraph better encapsulates the insidious secret agreement made by high-ranking priests and doctors, thus by religious and secular authorities with respect to population control than paragraph 15 in the encyclical letter Humanae Vitae, Latin for human life, which was issued by the Holy See in 1968 and that is subtitled On the Regulation of Birth. Under the heading Lawful Therapeutic Means, it states, and I quote, "On the other hand, the Church does not consider at all illicit the use of those therapeutic means necessary to cure bodily diseases, even if a foreseeable impediment to procreation should result therefrom, provided such impediment is not directly intended for any motive whatsoever." End of quote. In other words, so long as the medical community sterilizes people while healing them of another ailment, the Church approves. This kind of hypocrisy characterizes the war on fertility and therefore the system of international peace based on population control. And it is this hypocrisy that gave rise to the concept of plausible deniability, a defense strategy term that, like nuclear deterrence, makes the civilian population the target of military operations. While this encyclical letter was issued by Pope John Paul VI in 1968, the paragraph is attributed, according to a footnote, to a speech given by Pope Pius XII in 1953 to an audience of doctors during the 26th Congress of the Italian Association of Urology. Armed with this tacit permission by the world's highest moral authority to subvert fertility, the international community, centered at the United Nations and governments around the world, began to use medicine as a cover for covert depopulation. To stay within the constraints of the Church and to preserve the legitimacy of the state, secular authorities unleashed the sterilizing power of fluoride under the pretext of combating tooth decay and used false research to corrupt doctors to do so. Vaccines laced with the ACG hormone, the human chorionic gonadotropin, are used under the false pretext of purportedly immunizing the populace against tetanus, pneumonia, and even the flu. GMOs imbued with sterilizing and carcinogenic glyphosates are pandered as the solution to vitamin deficiencies and world hunger. Plasticizers, the nastiest of endocrine disruptors, are justified for their sanitary properties and are used in the bottling, packaging, and storage of food and beverages to create an inescapable sterilizing environment. And a slew of psychotropic drugs, as well as statin medications and analgesics designed to damage mitochondria so as to shorten lives, are pushed by big pharma on billions around the world for real and invented ailments. All of the above are the legacy of the unholy marriage between the highest echelons of priests and doctors, united in common purpose for the sake of combating population growth under the cover of plausible deniability. The third subject today, coerced vaccinations and biological depopulation. So long as population control is pursued in secret by the highest authorities rather than openly by the people themselves, periodic mass killings have been necessary to compensate for the incomplete success of the more humane methods of population control now in place, be they social, such as delayed marriage and the incorporation of women in the workforce, economic, such as delayed employment and the suppression of wages, legal, such as draconian laws that criminalize poverty and formerly acceptable social behaviors, chemical, such as the adulteration of the basic elements of life with endocrine disruptors, or pharmacological, such as the malaria drug artemisinin, which is based on the sweet wormwood plant known to have sterilizing properties since antiquity and whose sterilizing properties are made all the more potent by synthesizing its active ingredient. The HIV/AIDS pandemic that has been ravaging Africa for the past 30 years is one such man-made mass-killing event in the same tradition as the bubonic plague in past centuries and the 1918 Spanish flu. Its main purpose was to increase death in a region where methods of birth prevention could not be implemented due to lack of political will and infrastructure. In the absence of low fertility to hold population growth, high mortality would have to do the job. Its secondary purpose was to alter the sexual behavior of peoples and cultures and that have not devised religious or social prescriptions to limit childbearing to marriage only, and that due to sexual promiscuity have fertility rates that are environmentally unsustainable and economically undesirable. The fear of infection, it was hoped, would force Africans to wear condoms, and in so doing, unwanted pregnancies would be prevented. More recently, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which was another man-made pandemic, targeted a region of the world that has never seen Ebola, but has the highest fertility rates in the world, the result of which the population grows at a whopping 4% annual rate. The fear of infection and the fear of dying from Ebola gave the depopulation lobby the ammunition needed to accomplish two population control objectives. One, compel Africans to practice safe sex, and two, use the newly created Ebola vaccines to purportedly immunize all males and females of childbearing age, while at the same time sterilizing them. The sum total of the above chemical, biological, and bacteriological methods are designed to weaken and confuse the autoimmune response of billions in preparation for naturally occurring pathogens or man-made pandemics that will be engineered when and if the UN and its agencies, aided by the military-industrial complex, decide to implement final solutions to prevent select regions of the world from losing control of society and to aid backward countries in reaching their socioeconomic goals. Anyone who threatens the cover of secrecy behind which the depopulation program is hidden through plausible deniability and who therefore jeopardizes the credibility and legitimacy of the state, the viability of the United Nations and of the international order, the morality of the church, and the continuing existence of the post-World War II international framework for peace becomes a target of the global police state, and neither presidents nor common men are spared from the systematic destruction of their credibility and lives. I am the first man in history to have stood my ground and survived such systemic, multi-pronged, and vicious attack, and I have the power of the internet to thank, and most certainly not the media or civil society. The last strategy to employ biological means to reduce the population is, of course, the COVID pandemic and the mRNA vaccines that were used to coercively vaccinate some 6 billion people. I need not elaborate on this subject since I have discussed it at large already and it is fresh in the memory of each and every one of us since we all lived through it from 2020 to 2023. The system switched to vaccines as the method of choice for depopulation because it allows governments to target specific populations for specific purposes, which chemical methods cannot do. For once you poison the food with chemicals, young and old alike suffer the consequences. Vaccines, by contrast, can be used to prematurely kill the old, sterilize the young, and sicken and sideline adults deemed superfluous by the system. Vaccines can accomplish the desired depop objectives in one shot a year for just pennies and just by co-opting the medical profession and big pharma. Whereas poisoning the entire food system continuously costs a fortune and requires the corruption and debasement of all industries and professions. A hybrid form of chemical and biological warfare has been added to the system's arsenal of depopulation weapons under the pretense of fighting climate change. I'm talking about the geoengineering program, which uses chemtrails to primarily create artificial clouds in order to increase the albedo effect and reduce atmospheric heating, but that are also used to spray the population with chemical poisons and bacteriological agents in order to increase morbidity and mortality. Moral, religious, and political obstacles to open and legislated means of population control have forced the authorities to proceed under the cover of plausible deniability, while the world's growing demographic and environmental problems have compelled them to accelerate and intensify the war on fertility and longevity. The result is full spectrum dominance of the civilian population by the military-industrial complex and the rendering of the entire world into a theater of war, a battle space. The only constant in our history has been to kill. The reasons for killing have also remained the same. 1, for reproduction, access to mates, and 2, for survival, access to resources. The motivation, too, has remained the same, to wield absolute power over mankind. The methods of population control, however, have evolved from outright killing, infanticide, matricide, patricide, cannibalism, mass ritual sacrifice, and war, to persuading people to commit suicide, such as self-immolation and suicidal arranged wars, to rendering people incapable of conception, such as castration and male and female circumcision, to excluding people from reproduction either forcibly through slavery or voluntarily through monasticism, to denying children the right to live through abortion, to preventing conception through involuntary surgical sterilization, covert chemical sterilization with endocrine disruptors, and coercive biological sterilization with vaccines, to subverting the sexual drive to render people incapable or unwilling to reproduce through chemical or biological destruction of libido, to causing sexual confusion to exclude people from procreation through psychosocial LGBTQ propaganda, sex change operations, and psychological emasculation, to subverting immunity to shorten lifespans through drugs, medical protocols, over-medication, mRNA vaccines, vaccines in general, Wi-Fi radiation, and chemtrails. To last, trapping people in a digital universe and denying them the right to reproduce and the right to live through the metaverse, the techno dictatorships, and transhumanism. To control population growth instinctively, retroactively, actively, and finally proactively without being detected, all faiths and social systems have been based on falsehoods. Like it or not, the world's religions have had to face the existential problems caused by the instinct to survive, scarcity, and the instinct to reproduce, overpopulation, and in so doing had to align themselves again and again with the secular authorities, the kings, emperors, sovereigns, overlords, pashas, caliphs, and maharajas of the world to find ways of preventing the collapse of civilization. To this end, the unspoken and always denied role of religion, of any and all religions, has always been and continues to be to condition the mind to believe in fantastic concepts that contradict the real world, and in this fashion gain full control over human beings at the intellectual, psychological, and emotional levels, so they accept anything and everything that is convenient for secular and religious leaders alike in the course of pursuing population control. For if you can get people to believe that Moses split the Red Sea with his staff, that Jesus walked on water, or that Mary conceived immaculately, then you can get people to believe anything, however irrational, ludicrous, or dangerous to their own survival. Blind faith is a counterweight to man's survival instinct when misused, and an invaluable psychological crutch when used for the right reasons. Every religious concept is a sword with two edges, and religion at its best has tried to walk a fine line between the destructive and constructive aspects of existence to ensure stability by preserving the status quo of civilization. It has not always succeeded. It is easy in hindsight to decry, deride, and criticize our forefathers. They did not have our advantages. They had neither the experience nor the knowledge or the technology to tackle the mighty instincts that drive our actions. They were tapping in the dark with a cane, the blind leading the blind, and from every trip and fall they learned a hard lesson. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, and those who took it had nothing to rely on but their instincts and intellect, for they had no historical record to draw lessons from. Every decision was fraught with dangers. Every action was an experiment without guarantees and a stunt without safety nets and margins for error. Theirs was a life of sweat and toil, of war and fear, and of filth and cruelty. They were first crawling and later climbing slowly but surely above nature and their very own nature, but nature kept pulling them back. It is not easy to create a world separate from the world, but they did it, and the cost was high and paid in life and limb by every generation. We can change that. We can liberate mankind from the tyranny of covert methods of depopulation and the prison of deception, corruption, manipulation, and lies. We can free the world from the grip of evil. The truth will set us free. Continuing with covert methods of depopulation will lead either to environmental or nuclear annihilation. Either to this or to that. But if the truth is to set us free, each and every one of you must face it. I am the torchbearer of truth on this planet at this time. God gave me this mission. As such, I am the embodiment of the divine on earth. I am religion. You must all treat me as such or suffer the consequences and die by the colossal weight of your collective stupidity. Thank you for your attention.